Hello, my name is Anthony Allen. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Kentucky Society of CPAs. And I have here with me Russ Woodward, who's one of our policy consultants. Thanks for joining us, Russ.
It's great to be here.
So, we're just here to talk about the legislative session here in Kentucky that just wrapped up on Monday, April 15th. And we're going over some of the details of that and what we were able to accomplish, what happened and what didn't happen. And just as kind of a short recap, here in Kentucky, we have a part-time legislature. We have 60-day and 30-day sessions that alternate in between years because we pass a 2-year budget. And so these legislators come in, they take time to look at these things, and then they move forward from there. So we get them for a short period of time, but that's when a lot of major policy implications happen. And so we just want to make sure we get that information to you all. So Russ, kind of tell us what happened this session. What were some of the big points that occurred, and kind of get started there.
The past couple of years, it's been very tax policy heavy as the General Assembly has moved to lower the personal income tax. As we entered this particular session, however, the members of the General Assembly and the leadership and the A&R chairs both kind of decided that, hey, let's let this cake bake a little bit. Let's see where we are on tax policy, but yet let's do everything we can to continue to move our personal income tax to hopefully 0% at some point. We're going to get to 3.5% in January of 2025. Correct? 26, January of 2026, which is part of their overall goal. So this session, we really didn't tackle so much tax policy as we did other things. The state did have a little bit more money than they usually do, so there were one-time appropriations for various projects, which totaled over $1 billion. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Anthony.
2.7.
$2.7 billion to be precise. A lot of the energy within the General Assembly went towards that and the state's budget. We also dealt with other issues such as a constitutional amendment regarding school choice, as well as medical marijuana cleanup. So a lot of the larger pieces of legislation that we've dealt with in the past, we cleaned up this past session. And we also passed a fairly robust 2-year budget.
So kind of building off of that and looking at the landscape, and appreciate you kind of laying that out, Russ. Mm-hmm. KyCPA in this position has always been playing as an objective arbiter on things. We try to focus on issues that impact the profession. And when I think of that, I think of tax policy issues that impact you, those tax practitioners and your clients, business policy issues in a broader sense, licensing issues, because just as a reminder, CPAs are licensed state by state. So we have an overview of all of those. So those are kind of the top line things that we paid attention to this session. And I'll kind of go through some of our top policy priorities that we achieved. So there was a revenue package that came through this session, not as significant as the reforms of the last few years, but we were able to get Kentucky's tax code updated, the conformity on that updated to 1/1/24. And that's now the third consecutive year in a row that we've been able to do that. In the past, it's been tough to get that updated consistently, so we've kind of established a consistent update on that tax update. We've also able to work with an administrative writings provision of the revenue package, kind of enhancing those taxpayer rights, being able to access guidance more easily from the Department of Revenue. And from that, also there wasn't a whole lot that happened other than that from on the tax front, which is kind of a good thing that we've been looking out for, especially with keeping our tax code a little more simplified, mm-hmm. not just for our practitioners, but their clients as well.
And I'd add, while there are a lot of good pieces of legislation, there are also some that aren't as good. So a lot of the job that Anthony and I do have is not only to pass legislation into tax policy, but also to prevent bad policy from going into law. And that takes up almost just as much time as the latter mentioned good policy stuff.
So for this year, we've had a couple of things that we were tracking, trying to avoid expanding the sales tax base to business services, especially professional services. As you saw a couple of years ago with the major tax reform bill, 30 new services were added to Kentucky's sales tax to help with broadening the base and lowering that individual income tax rate. This year, there was no expansion of the sales tax base. so you can see a little less guidance that's going to have to be come out with those issues. And then also we avoided any retroactive tax policy issues this session, because I know there was some of that happened last year, and we made sure that we recommended that anything that was going to be changed be prospective this session. But shifting from tax policy, we also looked at some new licensing regulations. The Society has a really good working relationship with our State Board of Accountancy, and we were able to get a couple of achievements done on the regulatory side in regards to our accounting education pipeline. So effective this summer, a couple of regulations that were approved by the General Assembly and our State Board of Accountancy include an expansion of the CPA exam timeline from 18 to 30 months. That'll be effective this summer. And then also eliminating the internship hour cap that can count towards your 150 credit hours. So those are just some things that we tried to help with those practical solutions. So this year, in addition to a very low kind of tax reform year, there were some other tax provisions that folks were trying to get across the finish line. Notably, a lot of constitutional amendments, as Russ had mentioned earlier. One of those was the local tax constitutional amendment. And that's been an initiative the past few years. But this year, even though there was a big push for that, it kind of fell short.
It did, and the agreement that the House had with the Senate is because the House has passed this amendment the past couple of sessions. This year, however, they said unless you have the votes in the Senate to do so, we're not going to address it in the House. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your point of view, the votes were never there in the Senate. So it never did quite get a hearing in the House. However, I do believe that this is an issue that will probably come back again, as it has the past few sessions, and we'll be dealing with it probably next session as well.
And as a reminder, so for constitutional amendments, how they're passed is they have to be passed in the House and the Senate by a 3/5 majority, which is about 60 votes in the House and about 23 votes in the Senate. And then once it's passed from there, it goes straight to the ballot to you, the voters. That's where it has to be ratified by a simple majority on the ballot in an election year. So it's kind of a tough uphill climb, but it's something we'll keep track on.
Absolutely, because there will be tax implications with that, especially at the local level.
So from there, we also had our Senate Resolution 256, that is recognizing the 100-year anniversary of KyCPA. We were founded in 1924. And we were able to get that recognized on the Senate floor on the last day of session, or they gavelled out on April 15th. And just as a reminder, we're having our 100-year celebration at the Olmsted on June 14th, which will be recognized as KyCPA Day in the Commonwealth.
Absolutely, and as one of the larger organizations in the state, to have survived and thrived over the past 100 years says a lot about the profession itself and the leadership that the society has enjoyed over the course of these past 100 years.
So another part of our job on KyCPA's advocacy team is working with our Political Action Committee, which is made up of a board of trustees of KyCPA members from throughout the state that help us work with policymakers, not just in Frankfort, but also through supporting their campaigns. And your financial contribution is very important to that process and how we're able to work with these policymakers and protect the profession, but also promote good policies on the tax and licensing and business front. So definitely look that up as we come up into this election season. It's an important way to get involved in KyCPA.
You know, the fact of the matter is in Frankfort and DC and around the country, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the table. And a strong PAC keeps us at the table. And that's just the reality of the day in which we live. And Anthony, what's the best way that a member could donate?
So you can go to kycpa.org, and there's the advocacy tab, and there you can go to our PAC website to contribute. We also have various other ways, and we'll be sending those out that makes it easier for you to just say, hey, this is the best way I can support the profession and support CPAs in Kentucky.